Welcome to our webinar Wednesdays. Today, we're going to be discussing a strategy or a framework of classroom instruction that's called Making Thinking Visible in the Math Classroom. Again, welcome everyone. Thank you for spending your precious afternoon with us today to talk to you about a really good routine and strategy that you can apply in your math classroom that will really help you and your students become a little bit more successful. My name is Ron Cruz. I am the coordinator of the Caribe Refugee Program here in Hillsborough County. We're situated here in Tampa, Florida. I'm also a statewide trainer and facilitator for ABE and GED through the Florida IPDE, the Institute for Professional Development of Adult Educators. I just wanted to go over some important things for you to remember. Throughout this webinar, you will have an option to queue a question or ask a question by clicking in the Q&A tab at the top of your screen. Simply click that Q&A tab, type in your question there, and I will be able to see them. At certain parts of this webinar, I'll be looking at my Q&A screen, and I will be addressing your questions orally or directly through your Q&A tab as well. Right now, all of your microphones are muted, and you're only in listen mode just because we want to allow everyone to have the opportunity to listen and hear what we have to say. And also, in today's presentation, we are recording it just like any other webinar that we have done in the past. It will be archived and will be available for you to access at a later time through the IPDE website. Towards the end of this webinar, I'm going to go through and show you how to access the PowerPoint slides and the video at a later time. Let's talk about our agendas for today. So we're gonna talk about our objectives for this webinar. We're gonna quickly shift into what are the qualities of a culturally responsive classroom, because in order to apply this framework, you would have to have a certain culture that's already established in your classroom for this strategy or this routine to become very successful. We're going to spend a little bit of time brainstorming and asking all of you about what is thinking and how does it look like in your classroom. We're going to apply a strategy called activating prior knowledge through brainstorming and reflection, and see how thinking through the lens of a student and through the lens of a teacher. And I'm going to share you some thoughts on thinking based on this framework. I'm going to talk about the framework and then show you some of the thinking routines that have been very popular in this framework and how it applies to the mathematics classroom. We're going to summarize everything at the end, and then I'm going to give you an opportunity to voice your feedback through an evaluation. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started with our agenda. So our objectives for today is, again, to increase your understanding how to make students' thinking visible through the application of simple routines. A lot of this is like simple tweaks to what you normally do in your classroom, just to bring about the thinking process, making it more visible to you and to other students. We're going to talk about ways on how to improve your strategies a little bit more, and that would allow this visible thinking to happen. And then we're going to think about some of the ways how we can incorporate these into your lesson, allowing you to put together a rich lesson plan that would make thinking visible routines a part of your daily instructional strategies. So let's think about some of the qualities of a culturally responsible classroom. There are 6 things that we need to kind of put into place in order for the making thinking visible framework to work in your classroom. First, we need to understand how learners construct their knowledge. So this is basically learning how your learners learn. Do they learn through hands-on techniques? Do they learn through best with the use of a technology? Do they learn through drill and practice using pen and paper? Those are the types of things that you as a teacher must be able to identify early on when they get into your classroom and start incorporating or create modifying your instructional practice to meet these learning styles of your students. Try to learn a little bit about your student lives. So not just the way they construct knowledge, but how their daily experiences contribute to the construction of their knowledge. So let's just say you have students that are concurrently taking, let's say, a part-time class in culinary arts. How would that help you make class more interesting for these students that are never been successful in mathematics in the past? Learning a little bit more about their lives, learning a little bit more whether they work on the side. If they work on the side, what work do they do? Do you find any opportunities there to incorporate some relevance into your into the problems, to the word problems that you show them, or some of the things that you do in class in terms of hands-on activities? Being also social culturally conscious is another thing. A lot of our students in adult ed, a lot of our classes are very diverse. A lot of the students that we encounter in our class are the students that have been marginalized in traditional settings. That's why they're in adult ed. That's not for all of them, but it would be somewhat accurate to speak to most of our students to be have been marginalized in the traditional setting. That's why they ended up in the adult ed classroom. Again, going along the same lines, hold an affirming view about diversity, that regardless of your background, your race, your ethnicity, your economic status, that people build knowledge in many, many different ways, and everybody can be successful in your classroom. Just holding that particular view as a teacher makes a whole lot of difference in terms of how your students construct knowledge. Using appropriate instructional strategies is something that we learn every time we have a webinar, every time we have a face-to-face training. We always have to match this instructional strategies that we use based on the needs of our students, based on their learning styles, based on the availability of resources, and then based on the guideline that's set forth by our curriculum. And lastly, advocating for all students. So regardless of whether they are from a marginalized population or they just recently entered your class, we must have an open perspective as to that these students, regardless what time they enter the classroom, that they are ready to learn whenever they come. So when we apply these certain things and perspectives and think about it when we are doing our daily work as teachers, it will help us accomplish what this framework is going to be about. So before we get into visible thinking, let's just pause for a minute. And I want you to use your Q&A tab, click on it, and answer this question. What do you think is thinking? What is thinking? So I'm going to give you a moment to just type in whatever you think is your definition. It could be a description of, it could be a manifestation of thinking. And then we're going to look through that and how does that look like before we can dive into to the framework itself. We need to have our own self-reflection of our own perspective. What is thinking? So I've had some here. Susan said it's evaluating. Yes, that is one manifestation of thinking when we're trying to evaluate something. And evaluation can be in many, many different forms. It could be in many, many different subject areas. Evaluating is adding some knowledge and putting into perspective, adding in some value to something that we have. Internal dialogue, that is really important. Somebody in our one of our webinar viewers says it's an internal dialogue. So very good. That is when students are having conversations in their heads. and debating within, in their heads. That is a form of thinking. It's a manifestation of thinking. When students do problem solving, that is also another manifestation of thinking. When they're pausing and thinking of a strategy to solve a word problem, that is correct. And that's all. That's Susan said that. Marvillo Gay. It says it's asking yourself questions, which is very good. This happens a lot in both language arts and in mathematics. Asking your questions, second guessing some of your strategies is a form of thinking. Whether it may be positive or helpful, nonetheless, it is thinking. Thoughtful consideration of facts, observations, and making meaning of these facts, again, goes alongside with evaluation, according to Miss Jones. Rosa said rational judgment or using your thoughts. These are all really great responses. Thank you so much. Developing ideas about a subject matter. Using your previous knowledge, according to Mr. Miller, using your previous knowledge about a subject to solve a problem. Or it could be just as simple as following steps. So if you as a teacher, and Chris is the one that mentioned following steps, even if you're just giving simply a set of instructions to students, students still have to think through those steps, because the teacher doesn't necessarily have to give all of the steps. There's going to be some intermediary steps that is involved. There could be a choice within the steps that you show your students to do. So when the third step of the, say, we look at the 4-step problem solving, explore, plan, solve, and check. If we do that process and you allow your students to go through and follow those steps, there's a lot of thinking that's going on through those 4 steps. So thank you very much for all of your ideas about thinking. Now, we're going to do a quick brainstorming again. So keep your Q&A tab open, and we're going to brainstorm a list of actions and activities in your class. So think about your classroom. Think about the students that you teach. Imagine yourself, you're in front of your students and in the middle of your instruction. Give me a point in time, or give me an activity or an action where it indicates that your students are engaged in thinking. So we are going to give you this time, how does it look like when you're looking at your students? What are they doing when you know that they're thinking? Or what do you see? How do you know that your students are thinking? So let me look at some of your responses here. Okay. Asking questions. That is excellent, Kathy. When students ask questions, that's an indication not only because they're paying attention, but also they are inquisitive. They wanted to know what's next. They wanted to know a little bit more about it, or a subject matter. That's really great. A blank stare is not always a bad thing. And that's, Chris, thank you so much for bringing that up. When your students have a blank stare, that's not necessarily that their brains are not working at that moment. That blank stare could be a lot of things. They could be doing an evaluation in their head, and you're not knowing anything. It's based on the context of the blank stare that indicates that that's where you can judge whether they're thinking or not. And when they, yes, definitely, Miss Warred talked about when they're talking to their classmates, when they're debating with their classmates, that's an indication that they're thinking. When they're playing a game, Miss Mersan says when they're doing an activity hands-on, where they're playing a game, ordering of cards, or illustrating fractions, is a manifestation of thinking. When they're talking aloud, that is. Miss Jones says when they're creating and graphing, there's a lot of thinking that is happening there. When they pause to read a problem, that means they're following your suggestions for them Thank you, Mr. Miller. And Miss Gallagher says when they're talking to each other, when they're taking notes. And let me pause a little bit about this with regards to one's comment. Miss Chris comments regarding taking notes. Um, you have to have some strategy with note taking, and that's a different subject. I don't want to get into it, but you can make taking notes as a thinking activity with your students. And there's many things that we do in the classroom that indicate that student are thinking. And lastly, I want to really mention this out from Miss Rosa. When they smile, when students are smiling in your class and they're looking at you straight into your eyes, and they're smiling, then they know they're up to something about something that you've asked, or they kind of have an idea on how to solve the problem, or they kind of have an idea of what the answer to your question is. That is when thinking is happening. So what you're going to learn through this webinar is ways to make that thinking, to draw it out, make it more visible to you so that you really readily know. So you know when they are thinking. Now the next question is, do you know what they're thinking about? And that's the biggest challenge. So as teachers, we know when students are engaged in thinking. So the next question is, can we understand, or is there a way to figure out what, the what behind that thinking? Okay, so I'm going to move into the next slide. So again, a bunch of questions here. You can answer both together or one at a time. Again, this is your webinar, so keep your comments coming because you are actually the ones making this webinar a little bit more rich because of your combined experiences as teachers in the classroom. The next questions I had to ask you then is, what actions spend the most time doing in your class? So this time, again, reflect back within this semester, just this term that we've taught from August till today. Can you answer this question? What do your students do the most time? I mean, what do they spend the most time doing in your class? If you teach a particular subject area, such as mathematics, what do they do most of the time in your class? If you teach language arts or science or social studies, what are the regular activities that you do in your classroom? So I'm going to wait and pause and look a little bit here as to what do you normally do in your classroom on a regular basis. And let's compare that, because that's what I wanted to know. And let's compare those with the ones that we say are indicators of when they are thinking. Okay, so when Mr. Sims, Mr. Marvin Sims say they engage in debate with other students about a strategy and how to solve a problem, or it may be on a different subject area when probably you're debating with a social issue or two positions in language arts. When you're debating with your students, is that something that happens regularly in your class, or is that a one-shot deal? So that's the biggest question I wanted to pose to all of you teachers, is to reflect back, and there are no judgments here. This is an open space for us to have these discussions because we're all teachers here. We're not all perfect. We make mistakes, and it's up to us to identify those shortcomings to allow us to understand a little bit more about this strategy. So according to one anonymous viewer, most of the time that is spent in his or her class is working through different activities such as solving math problems, reading and answering comprehension questions. According to Chris, Chris does most of the time students spend their time providing feedback based on their understanding, which is great. Miss Warren talked about walking through the thinking process. So it's a lot of modeling that's happening in Miss Warren's class. Miss McDonald says there's a lot of guided independent problem solving in the classroom. That is excellent. And then Mr. Miller does a lot of group activities in his class to discuss how a problem is solved in a math class. This is excellent, and this is what you will discover as we go through these activities is a slight tweak to what you already do normally in your classroom would make this thinking process surface a little bit more. According to Miss Susan, trying out solutions to other problem and identifying alternative solutions is what happens the most. That is excellent because there is not just one way to solve a math problem, especially if it's a word problem. There's many, many paths to that final answer. Miss Jones is talking about there's a lot of hands-on such as drawing, coloring, and asking questions and defining terms because vocabulary is an important aspect of learning mathematics. If you don't know what things are called, then you won't be able to describe what strategy you're doing, or you won't be able to accurately state what they're looking for or accurately provide them with some instruction on how to solve it. And then lastly, Ms. Warren always ask the student to explain why. Why did you do that? Why is this the next step? Why do you have to convert this fraction to a decimal, or why did you have to convert between inches to centimeters? And we'll find out in a little bit. Thank you so much for that feedback. Keep them coming. And again, if you have any questions, you don't have to wait for me to pause and say, oh, do you have any questions? If you have any questions in mind, just type it in the Q&A button, and during certain times in this webinar, I'm going to be answering those questions. Now, think about those things that you just mentioned and that the things that I just mentioned to you, what our co-teachers just explained. And this time, compare those strategies or those actions to actions of real scientists, of real authors, mathematicians, of cooks, of doctors, of nurse practitioner, or a certified nursing assistant. How does thinking look like in those disciplines? And do they have any parallelism to what we do in the classroom? Because that's the biggest challenge here. You know, as we move into a more work-related or a more competitive adult education grants where our goal is to get them employed, get them self-sufficient, get them into a job, get them into a higher education. Let's talk about these things because these are really important. So how do scientists and how do authors think? Does that thinking process or does that thinking activity, does that look like, or is that mirrored on what we're doing in the classroom? So when we're doing a lot of problem solving and collaborating, that's a lot of what real scientists and what mathematicians and engineers do, is that rarely would you find them sitting alone by themselves in their office. They're usually surveying the location. They're usually connecting with other professionals. They're usually communicating with each other when they're trying to solve a particular project, solve a particular problem, or conduct a particular project. Doctors are very, very, you know, I know you watch a lot of, you know, these medical soap operas like ER and those types of things. You see a lot of collaboration on those movies. So let's think about that and let's picture the thinking process that happens in those situations and compare that in what happens in our classroom. The more we can mirror the thinking process that happens in the workplace or in higher education, the more successful we are with our students when we do this strategy in class. Now let's think about your actions. This time your actions, really, your method, your way of thinking, and the way you as a teacher visualize and show your thinking to your students is also very important. Think of that time when you were actively engaged in something new or trying to learn or trying to understand something. What were you doing? What was your action back then? So I'm going to allow you to, again, access your Q&A button and type in, think about that time when you were trying to learn something very difficult. Because we were, you know, students think that teachers are like these mutants and superheroes, that we know everything. But in actuality, a lot of the things that we know, we have to learn on our own. A majority of what we had to learn and what we had to teach, we learned it on the job and not really while we are being prepared in college, which is kind of like a sad reality in collegiate education. There's a lot of move and changes that is happening now in higher education that allows them to become more responsive to what's going to happen in the actual workplace. But for a majority of the veteran teachers, a lot of the things that they've learned as a teacher, they've learned it on the job. And I'm sure you're nodding your head with me when I said that. So I wanted to talk about Miss Susan's strategy when she's trying to learn something. She makes a lot of mistakes and she keeps on trying. And this is excellent because thinking is not always perfect. Our minds, our brains are not wired in a straight line. They are wired in networks, and there's many curves and there are many dead ends in there that that you're going to have to figure your way around. And that's what's really important here, is that to show that the students that answers don't come to you immediately. It comes with perseverance, it comes with trial and error, and it comes with using all of your background knowledge. And self-talk, this is something that I do a lot. I think some students think I'm crazy when I'm thinking when I'm thinking aloud, but that's really how also that's the same thing that I do, Miss Merson, is that I think aloud to myself. When I'm solving problems, I can find myself solving problems much faster if I'm talking through it, even without any students around me. And type yes if you agree, and you do that thing too, because you get so used to explaining a problem in class and you work through the problem out loud with your students while modeling it. And when you're on and it's your turn, you're preparing your lesson for the next day and trying to solve all the problems ahead of time for your students. Do you find yourself talking out loud and reading out loud the problem, or talking out loud the strategy that you're going to use to solve problems? Most importantly, Miss Susan Kowalski says, discussing it with your peers and teachers. Accessing the available resources, that includes human resources in your surrounding, is an essential part of your formation as a teacher. And I am so thankful for everybody that have worked for me and helped me become the teacher that I am today, because without them, my learning would not have been complete. I won't be as good of a teacher as today if it weren't for them. So thank you for all your responses. Now, let's talk about thinking. And these are some of the thoughts that I have for you, and you can say yes or no in these things as I go along on the chat bar. But understanding is not a type of thinking. That's contrary to popular belief. It's an outcome of thinking. So what we want the students to be able to do in the end is to gain the understanding. But thinking happens before understanding. So that's something that we really need to understand in order to apply this strategy a little bit more effectively. The idea that thinking is sequential or hierarchical is problematic, just like what everyone had said already, that sometimes you will have to end up with a wrong answer to figure out the correct way to solve a problem. And sometimes it is after you've really solved the problem and then spent a whole, let's say, 15 minutes to solve the problem, and you figured out in the end, oh, I should have converted at the beginning. That's the reason why I'm not getting the right answer. That is really problematic if you think that there's just one straight path to learning. There is many different ways to do it, and many different paths. It's not a sequential, it's not a sequence, it's not done as a sequence. Rather than looking at different levels among types of thinking, we should focus on the quality of thinking at a given level or at a given point in time. Having so many students respond to you in single words or give you strategies in one word or give you reasoning in one word, is not better than having one student that could clearly explain to everybody in her own words completely a strategy that they use to solve a particular problem. So let's shift our focus rather than looking on the level of thinking and the quantity of it. We should focus a little bit more on the quality of thinking that happened for when the student came up with an answer. Students are more engaged when they're engaged in minds-on learning. So, and minds-on learning can happen in many, many ways. Minds-on, a lot of our trainings that we've done, we focus a lot on graphic organizers and hands-on learning in mathematics. That is hands-on, but those hands-on instrument actually scaffolds the students in learning and in becoming more minds-on in what they do. So let me talk about this framework a little bit with you. This framework was initiated by a group called Project Zero. Project Zero has been is a community that has been founded for a while. It started in 1967. Some of the members of this organization is Howard Gardner. Hopefully you remember him. He's the proponent of multiple intelligences back when it was really popular back in 2006. And then David Perkins, which is also the proponent of smart schools. So there's a lot of popular people that are popular people. When I say popular in the field of education, that have been a part of this Project Zero. Project Zero is housed through the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and it's this team of educators and professionals and professors that came up with research-based strategies that explore the practicality of thinking routines. How can we make thinking more of a routine rather than just a one-shot strategy that teachers use in the classroom? They want to push forth certain strategies or routines that you can do on a daily basis that would be, in the long run, very helpful for your students in forming their understanding of any subject matter. The research that they have conducted has spanned through different arenas, such as university settings, looking at public and independent schools, which includes elementary, middle, and high schools. And they've done this research in other nations other than the United States, such as Netherlands and Sweden, Belgium, and Australia. If you want to read a little bit more about the article on Visible Thinking Framework, the website to access is at the bottom of this handout page. And if you want to read a little bit more and you're really interested in this, or I really piqued your curiosity in the Making Thinking Visible, there is a book out there that is released by this Project Zero. The author is Mr. Richard, and this is something that's readily available. You can purchase it. We don't necessarily endorse anything, but this is just for your reference purposes if you are a book enthusiast. Making Thinking Visible framework is a way that encouraged students to develop a greater awareness of their role in the thinking process. So a lot of the students think that we are the ones who are the sole director of how they should think. That really is hurting students more than it's helping them, because of the fact that when they take the test, you won't be there to help them. And if all the thinking started with the teacher, and the students, all the students have to do is augment that thinking, then they've already lost half the battle when they take that test, because they were not trained into forming their own thinking. This process allows students to plan, monitor, and be in control of their understanding of a subject matter. Henceforth, those questions that Susan brought up in her comments is so important, because that allows them to monitor and at least can have certain control on how they understand certain things. And then as they become more in control, then it fosters a deeper sense of awareness of the learning process in general. So let's talk about the visible thinking approach and what are the characteristics of that visible thinking approach. Well, learning is a consequence of thinking. That's one thing. So, in order for us to learn, the teachers will not pour their knowledge in, from their head into the student's head. There's got to be an action there. There's got to be an activity. There's got to be an intent there, where students have to do something in order to achieve the learning. Good thinking is not only a matter of skills, but also a matter of disposition. So it's your own disposition as a as a teacher about thinking that's really going to guide students' perspective on forming their own knowledge. Developing thinking as a social endeavor. So we've talked about how thinking happens in the workplace, that how it should mirror what happens in the classroom. A lot of the thinking that happens in the workplace, in the professional field, in the public sector, is a lot more collaborative and a lot more social. Rarely will students have to work on their own by themselves, cramped up in a room solving problems, or or working or typing on a computer. The thinking is happening in a more social setting. All the more this framework pushes for more cooperative learning approach into your daily instruction. Fostering thinking requires making thinking visible. So how do you make thinking visible to your students? It could happen in many different settings. It could be just like one of the teachers said, it could be graphing. When they graph something, they're showing you how they think. When they show their solutions, they're showing you how they think. And when they draw something, or when they use a manipulative, that's a way of showing you and other students that they're thinking. When you use manipulatives, if you've attended our GED and ABE workshops, which pushes a lot of strategies on the use of hands-on or graphic organizer and manipulatives, that is, you're giving them a tool to show you and visually show you the thinking process. The classroom culture, I said earlier that you have to set the culture in order for the learning to take place, and we've already listed down what those conditions are in order for you to meet this. And then lastly, schools must be culture of thinking for teachers. So you as a teacher must also embody this approach, not just doing it with your student while you're teaching. What this says is that when you participate in webinars like this, and when we talk and you ask questions to the facilitator, when you ask questions to me, when you ask questions to each other, and when you compare notes, when you sit down in meetings, when you sit down in your professional learning communities, when you take in online courses, you are fostering a culture of thinking for yourself. And you are fostering the culture of thinking at your school. You are helping move that bar along. And that is only helping you become a better teacher and a better who can better effect or more effectively apply this strategy. So there's a lot of thinking routines that they have been developed. They're all in that book. There's so many of them. So it's not possible for me to tie it all into an hour of webinar. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you some of the strategies. I'm going to talk about some of these strategies that you can apply. And then if you're interested in other strategies, you can visit the website, the pz or projectzero.harvard.edu, and look at the strategies. There's a lot more to learn, and hopefully in the future we can do a part 2 or a part 3 to this, applying these strategies. These strategies that I'm going to show you, or these routines, they call it routines more than strategies because they don't want you to do it at a one-shot deal. They want you to implement it on a regular basis, daily or every Mondays or every end of the lesson. It has to be done in a periodic fashion. It has to be, students have to get used to it in order for them to get some value out of this strategy. So there's so many routines, just like I said. I'm only going to go over a few. One of them is called headlines. Some of you may already have encountered this if you've already attended one of our GED train the trainer workshop. It's called Building Capacity for Florida GED Programs. We have done these face-to-face workshops throughout the state. We are down to our last two face-to-face workshop, which is happening on November 18th. And I would, if you are in the surrounding counties or within a close distance to one of the locations I'm going to tell you in a minute, please sign up and register for these face-to-face GED workshops. We have two happening on November 18th. We have one that is being held in Pensacola. And then there's another one that we're doing at Santa Fe College. And they're both scheduled on this Friday, November 18th. So it's not too late to sign up. Talk to your administrator, ask for permission. If you're available that day, or your school will send you, you will walk away with a lot of materials and resources and information, things that you may not know about the GED test, what's new, what's up and coming. You'll get it all from this face-to-face workshop. So again, we're doing one in Pensacola, and we're also doing one in Santa Fe College in Gainesville. Okay, so let me go back to my presentation slide. Another strategy that I'm going to show you is the Connect Extend Challenge. See, Think, Wonder is the third one. And then lastly, we're going to close this out with a strategy called Compass Points. So one strategy that they talk about is headlines. So headlines, students live in that world of headlines because they're always in social media. There's always this picture of the Kardashians that they're always talking about right before they walk into your room. And what was that headline about? A lot of these things that happen to celebrities, a lot of things that happen through sports or athletes that of popular sports, it sticks to the minds of their students because they use a lot of headlines. So you can do the same thing in your classroom. Use headlines as a really, really neat strategy that you can apply, either at the beginning to pique their interest or at the end to kind of summarize everything for you. And what you do is you just ask the student these questions at the end. If you were to write a headline for this topic or issue right now that captured the most important aspect to remember about this lesson, what would that headline be? So it's an indirect way of students, using a headline or one sentence or so many words or so many characters, let's say a tweet, to summarize what they've learned for the day, or identify the most important aspect to remember. If you do it at the end, if you do it at the beginning of the lesson, so you can ask the students to, ask the students to create a headline about a topic you're about to teach, and then at the end ask them, how would your headline change after today's lesson? Because some of your students would already come to you with some pre-existing knowledge about what you're going to teach. So it will allow them to write a headline at the beginning of the lesson and do a headline at the end. So let me give you some examples of headlines of what I'm talking about here. So, for example, we finished, the topic of Pythagorean theorem. And I asked the students to, summarize this lesson for us, or summarize the theorem for me. What is the key aspect of this? And a student may write a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So that's one thing, and that's one example of what I saw what student wrote in one of our, another one when we were doing triangles, when we were talking about the properties of triangles, and we're talking about different corollaries that pertain to triangles. One student wrote triangles add up to 180 after that lesson. Triangle angles add up to 180. Another one is when we were doing word problems in my class, we did several different strategies of different ways to solve a word problem. One student wrote explore, plan, solve, and check. So what the student actually wrote are the four-step she uses, when she is trying to solve a problem. So students can do this, students can do this at the end of the lesson. Students can do it at the beginning, and then allow them to change the headline at the end if they gained any new knowledge, or they gained a new or a different understanding about the lesson after the activities you've done. So that's one strategy. The second strategy is connect, extend, challenge. This strategy is just asking their students to help make connections, okay, about what they're learning to what they previously learned and what they still have to learn or they still have questions about. So again, incorporating these three questions in your daily instruction, or at the end of a particular lesson, helps really make thinking a little bit more visible to your students. Ask the questions. How are the ideas and information presented? Connect to what you know and what you have studied. What ideas extended or pushed your thinking in new directions? And what is still challenging or confusing to you? What questions, what questions, wonderings, or puzzles do you still have? So those are the three questions you are going to ask your students. And let me just give you an example here. This is the one thing that, if you've attended already the GED workshops, this is one of the problems that we showed in that workshops. This was collected from the GED sampler, sample math questions. How could you make thinking a little bit more visible in these word problems, such as this one? Because there's a lot of things that's going to happen here. Not just students identifying what was given. They also have to, weigh in, okay, is everything that's given going to be necessary for me to solve the problem? Or are there extraneous givens here that I can disregard? And a lot of the GED questions that they're going to encounter have more information than they will ever need to solve a particular problem. Because one of the things that they're really testing students is the critical thinking. Can you sort through the information that is given to you and pick out the key or essential information that will help you solve the problem? So if you attend the GED workshop, or you're planning to attend, this is one of the things that we're going to be doing in that workshop, and breaking this problem down to you and showing you how to solve it, but more focus a little bit more on the thinking process and the strategies that the students can employ to solve this problem. Strictly about talking about the ideas, what do they already know? Okay, so, do they know any strategies or problem-solving strategies that they can apply to this one? There's many different problem-solving strategies. Could be working backwards. It could be forming a pattern. It could be solving a simpler problem. It could be writing an equation. Or students can solving using a chart or a diagram. There's many different ways you can do this word problem, but drawing that out to the student and showing it to them and illustrating that thinking process is so important. Okay, so the routine stimulates curiosity and sets the stage for inquiry. So this is the second to the last strategy that I'm going to show you. And again, you will see and you will hear a lot of familiar things that we've developed and delivered during the GED workshops this year. And one of them is See, Think, Wonder. So first, when you're giving the students, let's say, a word problem. Let's just you use the word problem that was in the GED test sampler, which is this one right here. It's a very complicated word problem because there's a lot of nuances, there's a lot of hidden details in this word problem. So this is a perfect time for you to use the See, Think, Wonder strategy. So first ask your student, what do you see? So then students can say, well, I see a cylinder, I see two charts, I see a chart for tree 1 and another chart for tree 2. And then what else do you see? Oh, I see that the height was given, and the height was given in a particular unit such as inches, and then the students can say, oh, I see that the question is asking for how many square feet of wrap does is needed. So I'm essentially looking for that green piece of thing right there, and I'm looking for the area of that green piece, that netting, that wraps around that tree. So I'm figuring out an area here. So then you ask your student and move on to the next question. So based on what you see, what do you think about that? So some of the sample, responses that your students will see. Well, I see a kind of a cylinder, but based on what I see, there's no top and there's no bottom to that cylinder. So if I am to use the surface area of a cylinder, I will have to subtract the top and the bottom areas in order to figure out the area of the wrapping. But in order for me to find the area of the wrapping, it would be essential for me to know how thick that tree is, or the trunk of the tree is. Well, that moves us to looking at the two charts. Well, what do you wonder? Do you wonder about using both charts, or are you only using one chart? And then we develop that conversation again with that student. So am I going to use the first chart or the second chart? And the students will say, well, just looking at the word problem, at the beginning it shows tree 1 there. So I am supposed to look at the diagram for tree 1. Okay, so as you're asking these questions, you're helping the students formulate a way, or you're giving students pieces to the word problem that will really help them put together and use a solution. What else do you see? Well, I see that the height was in inches, but I'm looking at the question right here. The question is, to the nearest square foot, how many square feet of wrap does she need? So I'm looking at the unit of square feet, and then I'm seeing what is given to me was in inches. So at some point in time, there's got to be some conversion involved here, because the answers are all in square feet. So I have to convert the inches to feet in order for me to solve this problem. So this strategy works really, really well in solving this word problem. And then the next step would be, okay, well, would you use the surface area of a cylinder formula, or are you going to take a different approach? So those are the types of things that would stimulate the minds of your students, and then ask them, okay, well, where are you going to get that formula? Is that in the formula sheet, or is it in the calculator reference? Where will you use the calculator reference if you needed it in this problem? Those are the types of questions that you should be asking your students, so that when they actually take the test, these are the same questions they're going to be asking silently in their heads when they actually deal with these problems. How am I going to show this solution? Am I allowed to highlight anything in this word problem so that I will remember as I'm solving it? Those are the things that you as teachers can apply and do in your classrooms, in applying this See, Think, Wonder routine. Doing this See, Think, Wonder strategy routine in every word problem that you introduce to your class is just going to benefit them and help them understand word problems, and help them fight the anxiety in solving the word problems. And lastly, I want to talk about compass points. And as I talk about the compass points, I'm going to draw back to you guys. Everybody that has been stuck around in this an hour-long webinar, and kind of assess your understanding, because we have to pause and take a moment and kind of assess where students are. So when you apply compass points, you show a compass and you ask your students to point. You want them to point up, for north, and down for south, left for west, and right for east, as at the end of a lesson. And what do those points mean? Well, E means excited. So if you're pointing towards the east, that means they're excited. They're excited about the idea. But if they're excited, then you ask the people that are pointing to the east, what is exciting you about this proposition? If you are building towards, let's say, simplifying fractions, What is that? So what is something to be excited about? Would this help them perform operations on fractions much more efficiently or not? If they're pointing on the west, that means they're feeling a little bit worrisome about the lesson. Worrisome, and if they're worrisome, ask them the question: what do you find worrisome about this idea? This opens a lot of discussion and a lot of this opens up an opportunity for your students to voice out and provide you with some feedback on how you can design your lesson the next day. Your goal as a teacher is to be able to address some of the worrisome points or concerns that your students have about the lesson. If you're pointing north, that means they need to know something. What, and then ask them this question: what else do you need to know? Am I missing a piece of information? Did I not give you all the formulas you need? Or is there a different way to solve this problem that you might be a little bit more comfortable with? What additional information would help you? And then lastly, if they're pointing down or they're pointing south, that means steps, or suggestions for moving forward. So that means they needed some suggestions for moving to one point or getting them from one point over to another. And then asking, what is your current stance right now about this strategy? And then, is there any proposition from you? Do you suggest anything? What steps might you take to increase your understanding of the issue? Or if you were cut off in let's say it's time to go, but you're in the middle of the word problem solution, and students point to the south, then ask them where they're at, and then provide them an idea or a suggestion on how they can move forward to finish the word problem that you were just solving. A lot of the problems that in the GED test partly are already pre-solved for the students, and they all have to figure out how to continue. Or they're not really asking for a final answer, they're asking for the intermediary steps in reasoning. So this is a really important strategy and useful strategy you can use with your students. So right now, I want you to type N, E, W, or S on your Q&A button. I wanted to see how you feel about this webinar. Are you feeling a little bit north? That there's, you're a little bit need to know more about something? Are you excited and can't wait to apply these strategies in your class? Or are you worrisome that this might pose some challenges in your current teaching style or philosophy? Or are you in the middle of a stance or in the middle of something, and you need something to move you forward, or you need additional steps in order to apply this strategy in your classroom? This is basically an introduction to the strategy of making thinking visible, and there's I can promise you that there's a lot more that would come. It could be in the form of webinars, it could be in the form of face-to-face workshops, but you will see a lot of these strategies already implemented and embedded in a lot of what IPDay is offering to you. What we're doing in this webinar is just explicitly showing you these things and what they are. So I see a lot of E's. Very good. Thank you. I appreciate that. There is a little bit of an N, and I understand that because this is just the beginning of this strategy. And I have a little south here, interested in practicing the techniques. Yes, sometimes you have to practice it first before you can really have a stance on something. If you haven't tried it, you won't know if it works or not. Thank you so much. I'm seeing a lot of E's, and this is a really very good indication. Oops, hold on. I see Mr. Miller. He has a northeast. And that is possible in this strategy as well. If you're both feeling excited, but you still need to know something, you can point to the northeast and give me that direction. So I'm feeling a lot of, we are really polarized to the north and to the east. As I'm sampling your responses, I'm feeling just as excited and just as a need to know with you. With that said, I'm going to show you just quickly where you can find the making thinking visible Yes, Making Thinking Visible handouts for this webinar. All you have to do is visit the Florida IPDay website at www.floridaipday.org and then click on the GED AHS as I'm doing right now. Click under webinars. And then this is where we are right here, Making Thinking Visible in the Math Classroom. Just hover and then you can click in and you will see, this is where you're going to be able to see the archived recorded version of this webinar and also the handouts to this webinar. Oh, and as I hover, you don't forget to comment on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. You can print this out or email or share it to someone right here. Okay, just going back very quickly to my presentation. Again, I'm just going to re-emphasize a lot of what the face-to-face train-the-trainer initiative titled Building Capacity for Florida GED Programs is being done throughout the state or has been done throughout the state. And we're completing our last leg on November 18. It's never too late to sign up. Talk to your administrators, talk to your co-teachers, plan a trip to Pensacola, see us there, plan a trip to Gainesville and learn a little bit more about GED. And then lastly, just wanted to summarize everything for you. All in all, we're just trying to increase a little bit more understanding of how students think, and we will increase that understanding if the thinking process is made visible in your classroom. Improving and tweaking your instructional strategies using the 4 techniques that I've shown you in this webinar and incorporating on a daily basis would reap you a great deal of benefit in terms of making your students successful in taking any type of standardized test. And applied some reasoning routines, making thinking visible. I would love to hear your responses and I would love to hear your feedback about this webinar. And in order for you to do that, if you have a smartphone and you have a scanner, you can scan the barcode or the QR code in your screen. It will directly lead you to evaluate today, surveymonkey.com to evaluate this webinar. I'd love to hear from you what you like and what you did not like, how we can improve this webinar a little bit more. If you don't have a scanner on your phone, you can just type in the link at the top of the page, www.surveymonkey.com/r/LSSCPTL. And thank you again for sticking around for an hour. Hopefully we're able to gain some really useful techniques, strategies, and routines that you can implement in your classroom to help your students understand math a little bit more. In behalf of Florida IPDay, our team, Ms. June Rawl, Joseph Reed, and Tammy Serrano, we would like to thank you for attending this afternoon's webinar. And if I don't see you in Pensacola, hopefully you have a very wonderful Thanksgiving. And thank you so much. Have a great day.